one of my favorite phrases is esse quam videri. It just simply means to be rather than to seem.
Hmm.
Like to be, like I want to be something rather than seem
Well,
something.
who you want to be, that is the most important goal. And that's why knowing your convictions, who you want to be is more important than what you want to be or become. And
Hmm.
it's harder.
Okay, good morning. Well, today I am honored to introduce a guest whose leadership has left an unmistakable mark, not just in the world of business, but also in the way we think about purpose, the way we think about people, the way we think about being a principle-driven leader. And Dan Hesse, who's with us this morning, is a former CEO of Sprint and AT&T Wireless, two giants in the telecommunications industry. I am old enough to remember when they didn't exist, when they were part of the giant conglomerate. But that got broken up, which we may talk about a little bit later. But Dan has been named one of the top 10 CEOs in America. He's got many, many accolades from a lot of different outlets like Wireless Business Technology. Laptop Magazine called him the most influential person in mobile technology, which is an incredible suit. And then his wife also echoed one of the best husbands in the world, I think. So it's not even just these accolades on one side of it, but he's also a husband. He's also a dad. He's also somebody who pours in to others. And those of you who know me, I'm all about authenticity and taking the gifts that we have and building something incredible with our lives, because we get one life. This isn't dress rehearsal. But accolades only tell part of his story. And he's led with integrity. He came through a friend of ours, Tim, who introduced, spoke so highly of you. And I've checked with a couple other people, which I won't name drop too, but it's always fun to do. I just say, if you're Italian from Jersey, you're always like, a guy who knows a guy, and you're like, hey, just curious, you know this name. But he's prioritized relationship, corporate culture, been in this high pressure situation, which you're going to hear about today, and a results driven environment, and yet balance these other things, which I absolutely love and want to talk about. And really, we'll get into what some of the principles from his life, and whether it's faith or relational values that fueled his leadership, and those values that we're going to learn from today will help us as we're leading our lives, families, and work and what we're building. So, I'm wearing a Jackie Robinson hat today, Dan. So it just so happened to be that way. No other thing, but I thought I'm going to start with a quote. I love quotes. He said this: life is not important except in the impact it has on others' lives. And you've certainly done that. So thank you for being here with me this morning.
Well, Todd, thank you. And thanks for that kind introduction. I will correct you on one thing.
Okay.
You, like most people, mispronounce my last name.
Oh my God.
It's okay though. It's Hesse.
It's Hesse. Okay.
It's Hesse,
Man,
but very few people get it right because it doesn't really look that way.
man, I went to school in Jersey, so I'm going to chalk it up to that. I mean, we do the best we can there, but sometimes the South Jersey system's a little rough. Uh, but I know that you're a student of leadership, and one of the things that you talked about, I heard in one of your talks before, was just a certain admiration for John Wooden. And John Wooden said, like, be true to yourself, help others, and make each day a masterpiece. I put that in my outlines a lot of times. But I wanted to talk about one of the really specific portions, chapters of your life where you get tapped to going from, you're taking over this conglomerate when Nextel and Sprint are actually merging. And for those that don't know, so don't remember this and just assume it was always this way, Nextel was this. It's almost like a walkie-talkie where you could just put one button and you could just talk right to this certain individual. And they were really big, and then they were going through transition. Sprint was going through a massive transition, and there was a reason for the merger. But can you talk a little bit about how you got into that position, and how you kind of walked into it? What was your vision walking into that?
Well, let me say it changed a lot day one because I was recruited to be the CEO of Sprint. That's when I joined the company right at the end of 2007. I was the CEO of a company called Embark at the time, which now it's gone through different transformation. It's called Lumen, as in Lumen Field, where the
Hmm.
Seahawks play in Seattle. And most of my career I'd spent at AT&T. So my last gig at AT&T, I had been CEO at AT&T Wireless. So I was familiar with the wireless business, but things changed dramatically on my very first day because one of the reasons I was recruited to be the new CEO at Sprint is the company wasn't doing that well. But I thought they were just minor issues or what have you. I'm at the Sprint hangar, signing my employment agreement, getting ready to, I was in Kansas City. I lived in Kansas City and Sprint at the time. By the way, this was 2.5 years after the merger between Sprint
Okay.
and Nextel. So,
Okay.
so the Sprint Nextel merger happened about 2.5 years before I joined, but that wasn't going that well. And that's why the company wasn't performing. Expectations were really high. This was this great merger, and it just wasn't going that well. So I came in as kind of a new CEO. Well, anyway, Sprint had two corporate headquarters at the time. Actually, it had the operating headquarters in Kansas City, which is where I lived, and it had the corporate headquarters, which I was getting ready to fly to in Reston, Virginia. So I get on the plane because the next day, um, my I was going to be announced to the world. I was going to talk to the press. I was going to talk to the employees. I was going to talk to investors. I was going to meet the board, the full board. I'd been interviewed with a number of them on the phone, but it hadn't met the full board. It's going to be a big day. And I get on the airplane, the corporate aircraft, and I'm with the head of PR. And he loves to tell the story because he realizes when he saw me as I turned white as I read it, because I'm reading background on the company and the press release and all this kind of stuff. I get to the business plan, and the plan of record had the company filing for bankruptcy in 6 months. That was the
Wow.
business plan, and
That
business plans are usually overly optimistic anyway. And I'm going, what? And he looks at me and kind of sheepishly, like he obviously wasn't told just how bad things were.
Wow.
So let me say, all plans went out the window at that very moment, and it became pure survival. And this
Mm,
was December of 2007, and what hadn't happened yet, but happened in just a few months, the economy in 2008, as you may recall, it was called the Great Recession. It
hmm
started to collapse. And actually, when I got to my office the following day, when I came back, because my office was going to be in Kansas City, there was a pink note on my phone from somebody to call him who I knew pretty well. Dick Fold was the CEO of Lehman Brothers. And, how can I help? Because I knew him from a previous life.
Mm.
In just a few months, Lehman Brothers would be out of business.
Yeah, I remember that.
That really is what started the collapse of Wall Street. So it just,
Mm,
for further background, not only was the company
mm,
in trouble, but the whole economy was about to go
hmm
into the can.
Proper. Yeah.
So it was a very, very difficult time. So all bets were off, and I had to get things moving very quickly.
You bring up something really important. I know there's some people watching this right now that are finding themselves maybe not in that situation, but for them it's just as big. It's stepping into something, you get into it. I had a post recently where I talked about sometimes when you're stepping into where you're supposed to be, it gets harder before it gets better, and we go in with enthusiasm. I love
Mhm.
what you said because I've seen a lot of business fans talk to people who, investment, and usually they're way up here, right? But life, can bring us some reality, and what advice would you give to somebody even when they're stepping into something and maybe they're sitting there and it's like, okay, I love what you said because you're really talking about like you jumped into a storm, you didn't create it, wasn't something that you had anything to do with, and it just is some things happen in life that we can't control. Not just bad, it just that life happens. Like that thing in 2008, we had a big investment down in, if you remember, Long Beach Island or Harvey Cedars. We had done some real estate stuff, and it was right at that time, and we just took a beating on that. But it was through nobody's, it wasn't anybody's fault, one person's fault.
Yeah.
It's a lot of factors, but you're caught up in this storm. Like, what advice would you give for that high level leader that's maybe in that top 1% or even top 5%? And they're like, okay, what do I focus on first?
Well, I think it's important for a leader anytime they're coming into, especially a new situation, is to decide very quickly and communicate very quickly what you're going to do. And that's the strategy. What are the priorities?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to communicate those quickly or figure those out quickly. Who's going to do it? Who's going to be on the team?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, I had to make a lot of changes. About half the board, half the leadership team, I needed
Mm,
to change out. And then three, how it's going to be done, which is really the culture. And then there's another element of it that's important, and we may get to it later, and that's purpose. But you have to also sit back and think about your own personal purpose. So, getting back to my earlier story, I was really ticked off and was angry because I hadn't been told what
Mm,
situation I was walking into, and that was kind of on my mind all of day one because it was
mm,
primarily press, investors, board, what have you.
mhm,
Day two, I'm in this big auditorium full of employees at the Sprint campus in Kansas City. And I look up and I'm feeling really sorry for myself, how screwed I was. And then I
mm,
look out at the audience of all these people looking at me and knowing that their lives and livelihoods were going to
mm,
be totally dependent upon what I do. And I was feeling sorry for
mm,
myself. And I've talked to so many leaders, especially, I grew up as a military brat, and part of military leadership and a lot of the people I talk to and are friends with and who I've learned from over the years are military leaders, and they have this notion of servant leadership,
mhm,
this concept where the leader is there to serve the
mhm,
organization that they lead. And that was really the aha for me was
mhm.
stop thinking about yourself. Maybe you were put on this earth for a reason, because it's
Yes.
true. I never would have taken the job
Yeah.
had I known how bad it was.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have.
That I want to
And
stop
the
you.
future of
May
yeah,
I
yeah,
stop you for a second? Because I
yeah.
think you said something that's really, really important. Um, one is, there's a scripture that talks about, hey, man plans, but God orders.
Mhm.
Sometimes the things in my life, it hasn't been something like I had this premonition necessarily, or I've always had feeling and intuition and intellect. But sometimes, like one of the things I noticed about, I believe in God, that He never asked my opinion. Like,
Yeah.
hey, here's what we're thinking of doing. Now, I've said to God sometimes, like, hey, I'm really thinking this would be great. If you could just bless this for me, that'd be great. Like, fast track. I know you got a lot of other problems in the world, but maybe work on this, where I believe, we're in these positions for a reason. And like you said, servant leadership is something that many times is a mantra, but it's not always lived out. And the reality is, what that means is somebody's got to be willing to carry the weight with leaders, like leaders I deal with a lot of times, there's this faith element and there's life and family and business. It all comes together where I'm at this intersection and dealing with people. And one of the things I talk about is like, we got to be careful too how we pray. Because when we say, God, we're looking for blessings, or just say you're trying to grow your life, what you're really saying is, I'm willing to take on more weight. I'm willing to take on more responsibility. And growth means that I am growing to handle more, not less. Sometimes people think, oh, I'll get more. It actually is easier. And it's really the opposite. Because as a human being, there's a responsibility on our life for being here. And I love what you said. And I apologize for cutting you off, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
highlight that for those that are watching that, I had a guy tell me in a parking lot, I won't say his name, but he's really famous. He's a really famous athlete. He cornered me and he said, when I was really struggling with one of the books, and he's like, you preached to everybody else, about responsibility and role, holding your role in this place because other people are dependent on it. Some people, you need to do this because you're going to break a family chain. You're going to break something in your family. You've been given something, and it's your responsibility to build off that or break something that was in the past. For some people, it really has to do with society. They need you to show up. The world needs you. The world needs to be a better place because you're here. And so you are built in a certain way. And if you don't say yes to this, other people suffer. It's not just about giving money away, it's about being this. And I remember he turned the words around on me, Dan, and it was like, I was like, oh man, you're absolutely right. Like I don't have like in some ways, I don't have the right to say no to this. I mean, I guess I could, but like who do I what the man that I say I want to be means that I stand up to challenge and I stand up to these moments because that's what maturity is not about age. It's the ability to handle responsibility. That's how in my opinion, that's how we grow, as leaders too. So
Yeah. And what you find is when you take on additional responsibilities, very often you don't think you're up to it, but you are. You find a
mm,
way. And as a business leader, uh, I like I mentor and move people through their careers. That's part of it because, of course, I was fortunate enough to have good mentors as well. And what you find is you have a lot of people, geez, I can't take on all that responsibility. I want to give them a new job. They have a lot more. They find a way and they
Mhm.
grow and they get it done.
Well, one of the things you talked about too, you're known for culture. You've talked about culture, it's instituting culture. I hear culture all the time. I don't know that people always execute it. And tell me about that in your process, because that was one of the things you mentioned when you're jumping into this juggernaut, saying, okay, we're going to steady the ship and now we're going to start shifting the direction. Uh, talk about that, like the importance of culture and why you what you found and that's important to you.
So if I was to take a look analytically, even at the sprint turnaround, uh, what I would say was the MVP of all of it was the culture
Mm,
and the people who were there and who I continue to stay in touch with will say the same thing. And talking again about kind of the three pillars of, we'll call it the leader's responsibility, the strategy, the what you're going to do, the who's on the team, the who,
mm,
and the culture being the how. The problem with Sprint is when I got there, Sprint Nextel, is that even worse than not having a strong culture was that you had two competing cultures. Everybody wasn't
mm,
on the same team. So you had the former Sprint employees. So when I met everybody those first few weeks, a
gosh.
couple of weeks on the job, everybody introduced themselves as I'm Legacy Sprint or Legacy Nextel. That was their identity. They wanted me
Hmm.
to know which of the two tribes they were on. And I'm like, holy smoke, that's the problem. You got
Yeah, it's like people
it's
showing up on two different teams. They're literally on two different teams, right?
they're on two different teams, and
Yeah.
that's why the company wasn't operating as effectively as it could. So I got in front of all the employees and I kind of told these anecdotes about everybody introducing themselves, and people started laughing because they knew it was so true. And I
Yeah.
said, don't ever, I never, ever want anybody to mention to me whether they came from Spin or Nextel. Never again. We're going to have a new
Mm,
culture. We're going to start from scratch. And what I said is, I want you to own it like me. Now, I own the culture as the CEO. The CEO is accountable, but I want your input. So what I did is I said, look, these are the 25 characteristics that I have seen of the world's most, of the greatest cultures, the most
mm,
successful companies in the world. We're
hmm.
going to pick 10 of them. And I want you to vote, every employee of the company. And I took their feedback on what are the characteristics of number one, the company that you want to work for, and number two, the company that you think is going to win.
Mm.
That's the
Good, man.
lens. And
Yeah.
so I got all those back, but I said I will tell you, you're actually really voting on nine. One of them is going to be accountability, because as the
Mm,
CEO, I'm accountable
mm,
for the culture working and being strong. That's going to be a huge piece of my job.
mm,
And by the way, I want to get graded on a regular basis. So what I would do is every quarter, I would have a survey go out to the employees. We had 10 elements of the culture. And by the way, I made a wallet card about the size of a business card people could carry
hmm.
in their wallet that
That's good.
had the
Yeah.
strategy on one side and had the culture on the other. So
Mm,
everybody had it and they were reminded all the time, but we would rate it. In other words, we would evaluate how strong our culture was the way we would any other metric, revenue, earnings, you name it, it was up on a par. And so
so
culture
good.
became something we really worked on. So my last day when they had a going away party when I retired, I thought they'd have perhaps all the accolades, JD Power Awards, this, that, or all these company awards, the stock price. My last 2 years of the 500 companies that made up the S&P 500, we were number one in total shareholder return.
Wow.
Netflix was number two, Sprint was number one. Um, None of that. They had 10 banners around the hall, which were the 10 elements of the culture, because that's what they really identified with me. And that was what everybody thought was the key to the company's success, was really
Yeah.
living and believing and all owning and having a piece of the culture.
That's good, man. I know. So a lot of mine is from the nonprofit world. Well, I've had for profit as well, but mostly nonprofit. And that becomes really important, vision and mission, because people aren't getting paid. So you have to have a reason for people to show up. There needs to be alignment. And there also, at the same time, even in the faith world, there still needs to be accountability. we're on a big mission, so all these little components. And what I love about it too, ultimately, it focuses on what makes a business isn't great. Product matters, but without people, it doesn't happen. And the reality is in life, like nothing happens without people. When you build people to a degree and you have unity, even the scripture says like a house divided against itself, it can't stand. And that goes for a family, it goes for a business, and even any size business. Um, that is like Peter Drucker said. He said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Obviously, we
Yep.
need strategy, but I love that. I love that. I love that quote because I know, like even for us on that nonprofit side, being able to cast, what you did was, you casted a clear vision. And you put people together. When you evaluate, if you were to look at right now, I know you are coaching and mentoring a lot of people and mentored people. Um, is there any difference between like back then and today as far as leadership style or anything that you notice that's changed at all?
I don't think so. I think the basic values and characteristics of a great leader really haven't changed. As a matter of fact, the book that influenced me about leadership more than any other and really got me thinking about it and how to be a great leader was Plato's Republic. Okay,
Mm,
so you're talking, you know,
yeah.
a long time ago.
So this is
You
pre
know,
1900s.
yeah, I mean, it was a long time ago, but
Yeah,
basically
great
it was
point.
about virtue and that the
Mm,
most virtuous person should be the leader. You
hmm
know, and the virtues being justice, courage, temperance, and intelligence. Now, those,
mm,
one could argue what really makes up the most virtuous person, but that ideal was an old book. And anyway, I don't think that's changed a lot. I actually just interviewed General Stan McChrystal, who wrote a new
mm,
book. It's called On Character that just came out last week,
hmm
and he uh,
That must
references
have been amazing. I need
all
to go
these
watch that.
um, all these great philosophers
Mm,
over time, and those basic characteristics haven't changed. One thing that has changed is how to use the tools of
mm,
communication, because great leaders communicate well, and the tools of communication have changed. So, for example, things are much more remote today than
hmm
than they were back when. Uh, there's a lot more travel. There's just things have changed, so that evolves, but that I think is minor.
Yeah, and you talked about building this culture and leading, and also, you talked about the relationships that you've built. I've heard you speak to this a little bit, just on the I know you value relationships, and not just from a one-way street. And I think when somebody has a servant leadership at their core, then that's what comes out. Like whatever we fundamentally as a human being, as a man, or whatever we what we come to the table with, that's what's going to come out. And so if I really have the heart of a servant, so my dad was a pastor growing up, and I think one of the greatest things gifts he ever gave me, and we're still close, so he's not gone, but one of the greatest gifts he gave me was the idea and just training of servanthood, right? And servant leadership. He's, you know, Jersey Italian, old school. He wasn't a church guy till later in life. So he kind of had this edge, but he was strong, but he was also loving and had a huge heart for other people. And I think I was 15 years old. My first trip was ever to Haiti. We're at an orphanage, and we're going back, Dan. You're talking the age. So there's no cell phones, there's no running water. We're in the middle of this in the mountains building this orphanage. I remember going to sleep that night, and I remember that was the first time in my life where I thought, I'm not going to be like, I don't feel led to be like a missionary traveling around or doing that. I always felt a call to be entrepreneurial and also have a heart to serve people. And I knew at that point, it was like this light bulb went off that said, I really want to help serve people. I just do. I don't even know what it's going to look like. And I was super rambunctious, mischievous kid at times, love sports, but I was like, in my heart, there was a moment for me that touched me that kind of like, I didn't have it all figured out, but just kind of like, hey, that's the direction I want to go. Was there ever, like growing up, I know you were in a military family, you traveled around, like, is there any aspects of your background that really helped serve you well later in life that you look at, you're like, man, I'm thankful for that.
Well, I think just the way I was raised by, as I mentioned, my father was a career military officer.
Mm,
He went to West Point, duty honor country. Uh, we grew up in this house of values. Uh, we grew up very Catholic. My
mm,
parents were both devout Catholics. They were the the values that you learned there. So I think, they really did shape me in terms of what was important. Uh,
Hmm.
and uh, and actually, General McChrystal talks about that as well in his book, where he, like me, actually our fathers were classmates at West Point. So we
No
had
way. Did you know
yeah,
that?
yes.
You figured it
Um,
out? Okay.
yeah, we had figured that out earlier. I had met him once, and we just got talking, and then we realized that our dads went to West Point, and we realized they were both class of 45, which
Wow.
meant that both of our fathers, including mine, he fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Uh,
Man.
yeah. So that generation really did
Yeah.
serve their country uh, well.
And
But
like you said, it was servant and selfless. I mean, it couldn't get more
yeah,
selfless than maybe that of modern generations that we know of. Um, And, everybody has that capacity though. And I'll say to the leaders, you have a choice. We live in Fountain Hills. Where I grew up, we do these little tiny houses in New Jersey. A lot of it was like two or three different style houses. I loved our neighborhood. But we moved out to Fountain Hills. We live in Eagle Mountain, a golf course. And then like all these houses are built, and it's like somebody has a plan. They build it. We always had basements. That was pretty common. But like if you want a basement here, you can have one. But guess what? You're gonna have to break up a bunch of rock. A buddy of mine just put in a house and they said, hey, if we get into these boulders, we can't break those up. We actually have to remove them. And so there's a little bit more cost to it. There's a little bit more time to it. But if that's what you want, we can build it. And I've said to leaders like you really every day you have a chance and a choice. You have a choice to say, what do I want to build from this point forward? And not just out here for my organization, but you as a human being and as a leader, like really defining who you want to be. And you touched on something. I don't know your thoughts on this. Um, I think a lot of times, at least in my experience, people haven't really decided what they want. They're not clear on what they want and really what they want to go do sometimes. And sometimes maybe it seems clear, but it's fuzzy. I'm wearing my glasses now just to
hmm
be clear. But you could have a Ferrari and we could have a 79 Pinto. We could line them up and we could say which one's faster. Well, the Ferrari's faster. But if we take it up to Maine and it's heavy fog, they're both equally as fast. They both will perform the same level. So clarity, is king for us. But I think a lot of people do at times on a personal level, in my experience, struggle with that. And then I also feel like I know a lot of times leadership can be lonely because the buck stops with you, and being able to have relationships around you, it's what not just saves us, but it helps us to give and take. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the advice I give to people who don't know what they want to do is, you must have some passions and some interests. Follow those,
Mhm.
because you'll probably be pretty good at whatever it might be. So, for example, on my show this week that's airing now, Robert Parker's a good example. He's considered not only the greatest wine critic of all time, but probably the greatest and most influential critic of all time of any
Mm.
genre. More powerful than any movie
Wow.
or theater or fashion critic ever. And he started as a lawyer. And he was a lawyer, and he was kind of an okay lawyer. And he was like a lawyer
Right.
for like 8 or 9 years because he didn't really know what he wanted to do. I remember the generation, because he and I are kind of the same generation. Everybody was going to
Mm.
law school. The people who didn't know what they wanted to do after college, they went to law
That
school
was
and
the
became,
go-to.
yeah, it was the go-to. You became a lawyer. And that's what he did because he just didn't
Right.
know. But then all of a sudden he started getting into wine. And then I remember he talked about how his parents were like, what? You're going to quit your
Oh,
job
I can't imagine.
and just start writing a wine newsletter? Well, that's what I really want to do.
Wow.
And then you look, you know, decades later, and I mean, he made a great living at it, and is world famous. Uh,
Man.
and it was for following your passion, following your love, even though there was no real business there. So that's the advice I would give people.
Yeah. And you and I had this intersection in a sense, not directly, but I was saying I got invited to a friend. It was an AI startup conference in San Diego. And she's an AI expert. And so she was running a conference and uh, Dr. Jacobs was there.
Hmm.
And I got a chance to be there, and I was on a panel to share about mission and living life of mission. And then he was a keynote and did an interview. I'd never met him before, heard of him, but he's a clearly he's an icon in the space. And then you shared a little bit about that, but this is why I think you never know what relationships are going to mean in the moment. Sometimes they make a lot more sense looking backwards for the good and the bad. I know some of you guys watching this that I know follow me, some of you guys have an ex that was like for the bad, like that wasn't good. But really, the greatest gifts we have in life is people. It's not stuff, right? And the greatest lessons we learn, positive, it's always through people. So I know you knew a little bit about him, and I know that was a big part of your life and his family and his son, I think.
Yeah, so I know Irwin well, and as I mentioned to you, Todd, that his son Paul is
Mhm.
a very close friend, became a very close friend because Irwin and I worked in the business together. We were kind of competitors in a way. He was this big, he discovered this thing called CDMA, but he's another example. He was a college professor,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and and just
Like
decided,
MIT, right? Wasn't it
yeah,
MIT? So he's like
yes,
MIT, super smart guy, right?
yep, and just decides to change and go into business. He's got these ideas. And so life has, these interesting paths one can take. And it's to, kind of just pursue your love, your passion, very often you're taking a big risk. So in both these cases, in the case of Dr. Jacobs and Robert Parker, they had good, safe jobs, but
Mhm.
they just weren't as fulfilled
Yeah.
in those roles as they wanted to be. So they went and did something else. And it usually, I don't know what the statistics are, so I won't say usually, but the cases I know, it so often works out very well.
Yeah, there's a quote. I was looking at it right really quick here because did you see them? I know you're a music fan too. I know you're a big music
Hmm.
fan. I am too. My dad growing up played guitar and he was a big fan like the 60s rock and all that. But I don't know if you saw the movie about Bob Dylan, A Complete Unknown.
I haven't seen it yet, but I
Oh,
plan to. As soon as it comes out on one of the streaming services, I'm
okay.
cheap. So, oh, it's in the movie theater. It's going to be on Max or Peacock or Paramount or,
Yeah,
Netflix. I just need to wait. So I'm waiting,
right.
but I do want to see it because I'm a Dylan fan, always have
Are
been.
you?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Oh yeah.
I took so it was a really cool moment because I grew up. So my dad played the 12-string guitar. He's played banjo.
Mm.
My friends would come over. We were like, play the theme from the Beverly Hillbillies, and he would just throw it out real quick. We would just laugh and joke. But he would play and sing. And I remember my mom playing and my mom singing. Like they would sing together. They would go to folk festivals back in the 60s and all that. And then, I told you he was in the military, but he played guitar I don't ever remember him not doing that. And him and my uncle and family functions was my aunt's piano singing. So music was always a big part. And then I started playing drums too. But we got the chance. I said, Dad, let's go see this movie. I knew he was a big Bob Dylan fan. And I thought it was a great movie. And he was just kind of sitting there, just reminiscing and singing some of the songs. I think if you're a fan, I think you will really, really enjoy it. But as you know, the shift that he had in his career, um, he went from this acoustic style and then he goes to
Oh.
this rock style. I mean, I don't know, do you even remember that when that
Oh,
happened?
I do. I remember. I think it was Newport Jazz Festival or someplace,
Yes,
but he
exactly.
got he got booed for the first time in his life. I think when he went
Yeah.
electric, yeah, people were not happy.
Yeah. Well, this was his quote, and I love this is leading into our next part. So he says, 200 people in that room, and each one wants me to be somebody else. They should just F off and let me be. And what I love about this section of the movie was it was like this is who he was. There was a movement that he lent a voice to, but at the same time, this is who he really was. He wasn't a trying to be a revolutionary. He was a musician creating great, deep lyrical music that was moving and it was applicable for the time, but he was still growing. And from a leadership level, my next book is called Prince for a reason. Like there's an identity. No two people on the planet can have the same fingerprint. It stays the same from the time you're born to the time you die. We have something really unique. So a lot of times the answer is already inside of us. It's not like it's not there. It's there. And I think everybody can be a 10 at something. One of the things you talked about, we talk about CEO leadership qualities and stuff. is this being authentic? And I heard you say there was a point you stepped away from like the bigger company and went to like a startup, or you went through a shift. And I don't know that you would call it a failure or just a shift in like where you tried something, you're like, hey, this just wasn't my fit. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I was the CEO of AT&T Wireless, doing very well. As a matter of fact, I remember my last conversation with the CEO of AT&T. When I told him I was leaving, he goes, "What do you mean you're leaving? I can't guarantee because it's a board decision, but you're the next CEO of AT&T."
Mm,
And I know that's what you want to be. I mean,
right.
you've worked your whole career. You're on the, on the fast track, blah blah blah.
Right.
But I wanted to go try something different. All these
Mm-hmm.
people I knew had started. I just didn't want to turn around at the end of my career and say, I wish I had started a small company and just done that, gone through
Mm,
that entrepreneurial experience, et cetera. So I did, and I did it for 4 years. We were kind of the only company in our sector that survived, at least because this was during the dot-com bust and all this was like 2000 to 2004, terrible time for
mm,
telecom tech companies, but we survived. But I knew that my love was operating at scale. So I've seen, so for example, so
mm.
many entrepreneurs who are terrible at running big companies. They have to go back and they have to leave and sell it and go do something. They have to
Right.
start something up again because that's
Right.
not their thing. There's different
Mm,
skill sets. It's not right or wrong,
hmm.
but there's different skill sets. For me, uh, I just like operating at scale. And that we're, for example, setting the strategy and building a culture where a lot of time in a small company, the culture is basically the founder, period.
Mm,
And there's no delegation, and
hmm.
having the right team and having the right culture and what have you are key to having a big company operate well, because a large company operates as quickly as the number of decisions which are made every day, which is directly related to the number of decision makers. So, for example,
Mm,
a lot of entrepreneurs, they still make all the decisions and they think they're moving really quick. They start competing with a bigger company where the guy running it might not be an entrepreneur, but he understands the key to speed is
mm.
delegating like crazy and having everybody in the company empowered to make decisions.
That's good.
They will crush
Mm,
that entrepreneur as they go
yeah,
up against the big boys, for lack of a better term. So
that's good.
it's a long way of saying I knew where my calling was.
Hmm.
I had been uh, really uh, mentored and developed to run at scale. So when I started at AT&T, every 18 months you'd be given a larger and larger and larger and larger. So you'd have no direct reports. Then you'd have five.
Mm.
Then you'd have 40. Then you'd have 200, then you'd have 2,000, then you'd have 10,000, then
Man,
you'd have 30,000. It's as you moved up through the
right.
the firm, as you just learned how to scale larger and larger. And I said, that's a waste. It would be like, maybe not the best analogy is when Michael Jordan decided to play baseball.
Mm.
He's a good athlete. He could play baseball pretty well, but he was even better at basketball.
Yeah, yeah.
He figured that out. He
Yeah.
said, I'm better at that. And that was
Hmm.
me. I figured it out. I go, I can do it, but I'm a lot better at that. I'm a lot better at running something
Yeah.
large.
That's really good. And I think, with the issue of, again, it gets back to like knowing yourself and also
Mhm.
being okay with that's who you're made. One of my favorite phrases is esse quam videri. I don't know if you've ever heard that Latin phrase. It just, and I think in North Carolina it's a motto, but it just simply means to be rather than to seem.
Mhm.
Like to be like I want to be something rather than seem something. And I think for a lot of leaders right now and a lot of young people, mid-level people, there's this culture shift and culture drive because of social media and all these different things. And we live off other people's highlight reels. And nobody wants to be a bad person or unsuccessful person, but it's this idea that why should I put so much time in? I should never be putting time and effort into trying to seem like something when I could really just put into something to being something. Why would I try to be a cheap imitation of what I could have been? Like one of the things I talk
Yeah.
about is like, I don't want to get to the end of my life and I stand before God and say, I'm going to heaven. That's great. But we're all running this dash. And in every season of that dash, it's going to require something different of us. And that's a hard part. You touched on this a little bit. We're trying to decide what to do. It isn't always clear as day. But that's part of the human experience and how we grow. And there's these windows of time, whether it's some say 7 to 10 years or roughly, when you're in your 20s, your life's looking at this and you start having kids or you have a family, and then it takes on a whole different model. And then you have empty nest syndrome, and now it looks differently. And then, you retire, and then, now your life takes something different. When you're a builder, naturally entrepreneurs at the level you're at, these top 5%, let's say, they're builders. We're building something. And my analogy to the house, like we're building something. And so sometimes we just hit these seasons. It's time to build another room on the home. And it's not always easy to find that, but the key of it is in my opinion too, is saying, one, I'm not completely identified by my last position or any position.
Well, authenticity, you mentioned it, is, I'm glad you brought it up because it is such a fundamental element of effective leadership. People can tell when people are authentic or not authentic.
Mm,
And getting back to culture, and I told the team, when we built the sprint culture that, I wanted their input, but one of the things was going to be accountability, but I was going to take a look at that and make sure we chose a culture that I felt comfortable with because I owned it, because I had to walk the talk.
mm,
So you have to be authentic. You have to pick a culture if you're the leader, that is you, that you can walk and naturally do it, and not pretend. It has to be who
mhm,
you are. And it's also why my head of PR at Sprint knows this so well. I pretty much wrote every speech I ever gave, except
mm,
one. One, I was just on I had just so much to do. I had this big address to give to this big conference down in New Orleans. I didn't have time to write it. He had watched me so much, and he had seen me throw back almost every talk that anybody had ever written for me, and just redo it myself because people can tell when it's you. By
yeah.
the way, when I see leaders speak and CEOs speak, I look and I usually lean over. I go, those are his words, or those were given to him. Um,
Mm,
what was interesting, I'll just, one example is one person who started, he was very negative on Sprint when I first got there, a guy named Jim Cramer. He has this show
oh
called
yeah,
Mad
yeah,
Money on CNBC.
yeah.
And so I went on the show once, and he, of course, was giving me a hard time, and I did the interview. And then the next time, he was super positive on Sprint. And then he started recommending us. And of course, it helped
Mm,
that it's about the time we started doing better and what have you. And I asked Jim, I said, what changed your mind on Sprint? He goes, Dan, you did, because you were just authentic. It was key. When I had you on, Sprint wasn't doing that well, but you admitted it. And you talked about the company's problems, and it was clear you
mm,
hadn't been managed. It wasn't sound bites. You were sincere and authentic, and you answered the questions. You didn't, if he answered me a lot of times people answer some other question. You just answered my question. You were
yeah,
authentic,
or
and that's
purposely
what I look for.
redirecting it, right? Like you're just not
Yeah,
answering the question, right? Like that's so good, Dan.
yeah. So he just said that was it, and that's what I look for. And people do the same thing. I mean, even politicians. There's one very well-known politician right now. He happens to be president of the United States, but I know people who don't really. This is not political. Who don't
Right,
really like him or his policies, but voted for him because he's authentic. He goes,
right,
you may not like him, but somebody else didn't tell him what to say.
right,
That's
right,
actually him. He's not
right.
reading it, he goes off script, all
Yeah,
that's what they like about him.
yeah, yeah.
So,
It's
yeah.
yeah. Well, authenticity, especially in the world we're in today, when you have it's not political. I hear what you're saying, but
Hmm.
across the board, say in this generation, say 20s to early 30s, there is a distrust for just these societal institutions in general. Like there's a general, just not hatred, but just, not anarchy, but just like, man, I just don't know. And it comes down to authenticity and truth. One of the things that I looked at, and we'll spin off here a little bit. I got to go to Rwanda a couple times. I don't know if you're familiar with the history of Rwanda when they had the genocide.
Hmm. Yeah.
30 years ago. We did an event last year. It was the 30th anniversary. So I've been there. We got to sit the president, his wife, and other cabinet leaders, a lot of business leaders. And when you look at what they did in rebuilding it, the president essentially said, I mean, this is an internal war. They killed 1 million people in 90 days, and it wasn't a big bomb. This is like, how do you get something? Talk about being in two sides of a team to create that much of hatred that a human being could do that. And going through, if you ever have a chance, it is one of the most just greatest experiences I've ever had, even though it's sad to learn from because it's powerful to see what they've done, which is turn the country around. Is it perfect? No, but they zeroed in on these three things. They said, listen, we need to get back to some level of integrity in the government. There has to be some level of integrity in government. We need a business environment where money can flow and people can have access and can grow. And then we need a level of morality. So it's religious community, the church community, like it was this three-legged stool. And they basically said that, like, if you look at a lot of societies around, if they have those three things intact, there's no perfect. That's not, but if there's an intentionality that says we're going to build this with intensity, and a lot of was, what is it about? It relates to what we're talking about, which is authenticity. And uh, it's just, I mean, in my world, it's really a big problem. I'd say for a lot of younger leaders, and it's a conversation I have on a regular basis. But you make a really great point, and it really is such a ruse to buy into. It's really a lie identity, to buy into something that's not who you really are. And the world is looking for it. But one of the things I know we need to wrap up here. I want to wrap up with a couple things. You mentioned growing up in a Catholic family. Has faith played? And I know you're a big Notre Dame guy, so let me throw that
Go
out.
Irish.
I have two really good friends. So Bertrand Barry, he's here. He played for the Cardinals. He played for there. And then another guy, he's an old school guy. I don't know if you would have known this name, Paul Costa. So Paul played back in the 60s and went to play with OJ, and his son and I were friends. And so there's one thing about Notre Dame people, just like certain other colleges, it's like they kind of bleed green. And then your most famous coach of all time, um, which his name is escaping me for the moment. One second.
Was it Air Parsegian maybe, or Lou
Uh,
Holtz, or
Lou Holtz. Lou
or
Holtz,
or Newt
ironically.
Rockney, or
No, it was Lou Holtz. Lou Holtz,
mm,
ironically, my great grandfather came from Italy. They settled in the Panhandle, West Virginia, which is a little
yeah.
slice between, Pennsylvania and Ohio. And they got jobs. He got a job. They worked in the steel mills and then sent for the two older ones. They came, worked in the coal mines, and then grew up there in a little town called Follinsby, West Virginia. And that's my grandfather was the first one to go to college because they all worked so he could. And he did great, became a business consultant, one of my heroes. But Lou Holtz is from that's a long way to get to Follinsby, West Virginia. So they're not on my top of my list, but because of that alone, Dan, I like Notre Dame's got a special place in my heart. But uh but what an incredible institution but back to the role of faith. How has that affected you in your approach to life in general, to your family? Didn't really talk about that too much, but also your role, you're in these multiple roles. And so anyway, what role has that played in the course of leading?
Well, I think, and this is one of the things General McChrystal and I talked about with respect to his book, about convictions, about what your beliefs are, and and how important they are for any leader. And that really what kind of shapes your character. It's a combination of what's important to you, what are your values, and then the discipline to live those values. Because it's one thing to believe things, but if you're just too weak to actually carry through on them, you won't be very, very successful in life.
Mm,
And so I do think it was important. So, for example, values and if we'll call it religion, my two sons, I raised them as Catholics. They went through all the sacraments, but they're very straightforward. They don't go to church. They're
right,
not
right,
practicing Catholics like me, but
right.
they're the finest young men. Of course,
Mm,
I'm their father, but the values are there, and
yeah.
I'm fine with that. It's the values that they live. So I actually uh, believe that the values one learns in a variety of faiths, even Islam. I took Islam as a course in college at Notre Dame because I wanted to learn about the values of other religions, and it's
Hmm.
founded on a really strong set of values. Uh, and like any religion, people can abuse them or can take them out of context or what have you. And Islam's not the only religion that's happened with.
Yeah, and you touched on this earlier. It has to do with principles. Principles
Hmm.
always work. They're timeless. You know what? You know what principle hasn't ever changed in my life, Dan? Gravity. If I jump off a building, like if we fall off, it doesn't change. Like it's gonna be the same. And I think there are core things, and to my point, even about Rwanda, I mean, they turned the country around. They're a lighthouse to other African nations, and they've made incredible strides out of incredible opposition and turmoil on every possible human level that a nation could go through. And yet, it was really principles and guiding forces and what you talked about even earlier, servant leadership. Jesus said, if you want to be great, if you want to be great, be a servant. Be a servant of who? All. I'm supposed to be a servant. I joke with guys sometimes. I'm like, look, I know it's hard, and I know you're such a hero in this circle. But let's talk about being a hero in all these circles. And at any given time, even as a pastor and running a side business and all things, we're juggling, right? Whatever's in your life right now, we're juggling it. Everybody drops a ball here and there. Like that's what happens. What I don't want to do is if it's my kid, I don't want to keep dropping that ball. If it's my job as leadership, I don't want to keep dropping that ball. Like there is this balance, but there's no exact balance. It's just riding these seasons organically. But principles are the things that always hold true. And if
Yep.
and you said this, you said if you identify them and you said, no, this is what I want to build, this is who I want, and that point of becoming, that's why I talk about that. Is like this is who I want to be. So I have something to go back for because I am going to fail sometimes.
Well, who you want to be, that is the most important goal. And that's why knowing your convictions, who you want to be is more important than what you want to be or become. And
Hmm.
it's harder. That's one of the things also that General McChrystal and I talked about is that the importance of convictions are to really understand who the person is, who the leader is that you want to become. And the reason discipline's so important is it's actually harder to live a life of principle than it is to become CEO or to
Mm,
become captain. It's actually
mm.
harder. It's easier to achieve the what because
That's
you
good,
can
man. That is
you
so
can
good.
you can bend the rules. You can when
Great
it's
point.
expedient do A, B, or C and get there.
Whew.
And the harder thing is to look in the mirror every day and know you are that person that you endeavor to be.
Mm, that is so good. When the story of David and Goliath, most people know that story in the Bible. But what I love about that little piece of that story is David comes up and he's not even meant to be there. He's delivering food. He's basically the Uber driver for the day. He's delivering food for his
Mm.
dad. And then they're like, he's this interaction where he hears something going on. He's like, I need to step up. One, he says, what's going to be done for the guy that stands up to this guy? And the king's like, hey, you're going to get this, this, this. Second thing is, it's like, hey, what they're doing is not right. So there's a cause, right? I think everybody in life all of us have a cause. It may not be that big, but in my life, it will be a Goliath. In your wife, it will be the Goliath moment for your life. And, what he does is, Saul at the time as a king tries to put stuff on him. He goes, no, this doesn't fit me. I need to go with who I am. We see about the sling and the rock and all that. And so, he shows up. What does he show up? He's serving, he's showing up to serve. He's in a moment where, there's a challenge and he goes, I have a chance to grow. I have a chance to get something I've never had. And two, I'm standing up for a cause that somebody needs to stand up to this. This is not right. And so, for us and being authentic self, like you have what it takes to fight the fight that you're in. There's more inside of you, what you realize, and nobody knows what they're made of until you conquer something. I heard this quote, I love it. It says, the mountain doesn't shake until you start to climb it. And it's so true, like till we jump into these things, that's when these things start shaking. But Dan, I'm so grateful. I got a couple last questions. If you weren't a CEO and God said, hey, Dan, I'll give you any talent you want, and just you could go do this, uh, what would have been like a fun thing that you could just go do? And you could be any age you want. So, if you want to ride on fire trucks at 11, you could do it. What would you want to do?
Probably be a professional tennis player.
Really?
Oh, I would love it. Or a professional athlete of some kind of a sport I really love, like basketball. I mean, to a big or baseball,
Yeah,
tennis, the sports I played year after year growing up to have been good enough. Because quite frankly, I probably never would be a CEO.
right.
Uh, because if
You
I was
loved it
good
that
enough
much.
to play pro basketball, that's probably what I'd be doing.
Well, and most people, you can't tell by where you're sitting right now because you and I look like we're the same height, but we are not. You got me by about 5 inches. You're about 6'5".
I'm 6'5", yes.
Yeah, I
A,
heard a
a
funny.
tweener, a tweener, as my coach used to call me, which is basically, you know, almost too big to be a guard back then, but too small to be on the front line. So at 6'5", you're like a really tall guard or a really short forward. You're
Right.
not just right for anything.
Well, you're a hybrid. You're a hybrid, and you
Yeah,
must
there
have
we
good
are.
ball handling skills, right? So
I
that
did. So I actually, I grew late. So I was a guard up until, I was a 5'8" freshman in high school and then a 6'2" sophomore and then a 6'4" junior. So all of a sudden
wow.
I moved up, I went basically from guard to forward and had to learn to
What was
rebound and do all those things.
I know you guys went on. You had some accolades as you were younger, and I can't remember this, but this is the way my mind works. There was a funny name of a team where you talked about you guys went on and you beat some team. Was it a state level or a championship level? And it was there a funny name of a team or a town? Do you know what I'm talking about? I should have written it
No.
down. Oh gosh, I'm gonna find it and text it to you later. Um,
Okay, do.
but yeah, it's well, and here's the thing. I mean, I do believe sports, on a side note, really is such a great attribute for any kid or something where you're with a group to help foster teamwork, leadership, and all of that. Because it helps carry us. If okay, so one other question, well, two. Uh, if you could go back to your younger self, like corporate self, like say in your 20s, what advice would you give yourself?
Hmm. Um, honestly, I've looked back on it and uh, I wouldn't change very much. And it's because, I mean, I would have done a lot of dumb things, but I had great bosses and mentors all the way up.
Mm,
And so I would say to anybody starting, seek a great boss, seek a great
mm,
mentor. That was and it was a structured part of we'll call it the experience of AT&T back then.
mhm.
But I learned to do it early. So I had mentors. I could tell what a difference they made. I went and sought out others, but I would have done that even more
Yeah.
because of what a difference it makes.
Well, and I don't want to overstate it, but this is just truth. I'm going to say it. And that is for anybody watching this, just why it's important to pour into other people, not just to make yourself, not just to make the organization better, but there will come a time, every week, Dan, because of what I do, there's somebody that's passing away. We have a large group of people we deal with and or in that process. So I've done a lot of funerals. I have a funeral Monday I'm doing for somebody. There will be a last moment, and we all are building that story now. And it's not about how famous I can be. It's the most authentic thing I can be. But the reality is, everything you and I learn, we learn through somebody else. And the most important thing that you have is what you've acquired here to pass on. So for you leaders out there building and young leaders, make sure you make it a point not just to be a receiver of mentorship, but to ask yourself, look around, be mindful of the relationships that matter, who you can pour into, because there's going to come a time where somebody's going to be on a story like this and they're going to share a story and they're going to go on and build something great. But part of their greatness was because of the investment that you made into their lives, the belief that you put into them, the knowledge and just guidance at certain moments. And that's why you're part of the reason why you're here. Not we have two hands for a reason. One is to receive, one is to give. Dan, lastly, if you were to go to heaven, God's like, we could do a FaceTime now to heaven. Who would you want to talk to and what would you want to say?
I would, well, my parents more than anything.
Mm,
Um, I miss them dearly, and just to thank them
mm,
for everything they gave me during my life. Um, I'm getting a little choked up just even talking about it, but
mm.
I'd want to see my parents and talk to them again. And actually, as I look at the afterlife, that's what I look forward to more than anything, is just seeing them again.
That's really good. Well, Dan, thank you for your time. Thank you for your transparency. Thank you for sharing your story. You have reminded us again that great leadership is not just climbing the ladder. It is that, but it's also about creating ways and lifting other people along the way. It's sustaining vision. It's, leading with conviction. It's being able to help people lead cultures that drive not just performance, but relationships that build influence and actually it's building into purpose that outlives our position, outlives our lives. And John Wooden said this, I'll end on this. He said, success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you made the effort to become the best at which you're capable of being. So, Dan Hesse, thank you so much. I've enjoyed the time with you. I appreciate all you're doing. And we're going to tag, he's an incredible show on mentorship that I want to encourage you all to go and just tap into and learn. And again, thank you for all you do to help. I don't, we haven't been friends for long, but I can tell you made a difference in my world and so many other people. So thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you, Todd. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks.